The grand chamber of the Galactic Concorde was the largest structure ever built by intelligent life. It stretched across 3 kilometers of pure crystal and floating metal. Hanging in the void between stars like a jewel made of light, 412 species had representatives here, each with their own section of seats, their own atmosphere bubbles, their own translators humming quietly in the background. Ambassador Daniel Harper stood alone at the central podium. He was a tall man in his 50s, with gray hair cut short and a face that had seen too many difficult negotiations. His dress uniform was crisp and perfect, even though the humidity in the chamber was uncomfortable for humans. The Vrelian delegates liked it wet. Today was their turn to control the environment. Around him, thousands of alien eyes watched. Some had no eyes at all, sensing him through heat or sound or magnetic fields. It did not matter. They were all watching, all waiting for the verdict that everyone already knew was coming. High Chancellor Zorvath rose from his seat at the top of the chamber. He was a Calaxian, a species of living metal that had evolved on a world of molten rock and magnetic storms. His body was made of interlocking plates that shifted and clicked as he moved. When he spoke, his voice came from somewhere deep inside his chest, translated into the universal trade language that all species understood. "The vote has been counted," Zorvath announced, "by a count of 397 in favor and 15 against. The Galactic Concorde has reached a decision." Daniel Harper did not move. He had expected this. Everyone had expected this. "The Concorde has determined that humanity poses an unacceptable risk to galactic stability," Zorvath continued. "Your species is too aggressive, too unpredictable, too dangerous. Your technologies advance too quickly. Your population grows too fast. Your ideas spread too easily." Chamber was silent. Not even the atmospheric processors made a sound. "Therefore, Earth and all human colonies are hereby exiled from Concorde space. You have 90 standard cycles to withdraw all vessels, all personnel, and all assets from our territory. After that period, any human found in Concorde space will be subject to immediate detention. Any human vessel will be destroyed without warning." A wave of satisfaction passed through the assembly. The Kathrani delegates, who looked like giant insects made of black glass, clicked their mandibles in approval. The Viasian representatives, beings of flowing light contained in magnetic bottles, pulsed with bioluminescent smugness. Even the usually neutral Vorish allowed their tentacles to relax in obvious relief. Daniel Harper looked up at all of them. 400 species, representing trillions of beings across millions of worlds. They had just voted to throw humanity out of galactic civilization. They had just declared his entire species as unwelcome in the community of intelligent life. And then he smiled. It was not a bitter smile or an angry one. It was the kind of smile a person might give when a long and difficult game finally came to an end. "The United Earth government accepts the verdict of this assembly," he said, his voice calm and clear. "We will comply fully with the terms of exile. All human assets will be withdrawn within the time specified." Confusion rippled through the chamber. They had expected anger. They had expected threats. They had expected the humans to fight, to argue, to demand reconsideration. That was what humans did. That was why they were dangerous. But Ambassador Harper simply nodded politely, gathered his documents, and turned toward the exit. His footsteps echoed in the sudden silence, each one crisp and unhurried. At the doorway, he paused. He looked back over his shoulder at the assembled representatives of galactic civilization. "Good luck out here," he said. "You are going to need it." Then he was gone. High Chancellor Zorvath stared at the empty doorway for a long moment. Something felt wrong. This was not how it was supposed to happen. The humans were supposed to be devastated. They were supposed to beg for reconsideration. Instead, their ambassador had walked away like a man leaving a party that had grown boring. But the vote was done. The decision was made. Whatever the humans were planning, it was no longer the Concorde's concern. The assembly moved on to other business. On the observation deck of the human, diplomatic vessel Horizon's Edge, Admiral Catherine Brooks watched the massive Concorde station shrink in the view screen. She was a small woman with iron-gray hair and the kind of eyes that had seen too much to be surprised by anything, Commander Lucas Grant. Her executive officer stood beside her. He was younger, still capable of being shocked. "Well," he said, "that went about as we expected." "Better, actually," Catherine replied. A junior officer brought her a cup of coffee, and she accepted it with a nod of thanks. "They gave us 90 cycles. Intelligence predicted 60. Do you think they understand what they have done?" Catherine took a sip of her coffee. It was the good stuff from the plantations on New Hawaii. She would miss being able to get it easily once they withdrew from Concord space. "But only for a little while. Not yet," she said. "But they will." She turned to the navigation officer, a young woman named Lieutenant Reyes, who had been born on Mars and had never seen Earth except in pictures. "Set course for Earth. Best speed." "Yes, Admiral. We will be home in 4 days." Catherine looked back at the stars, at the vast expanse of Concord space they were leaving behind. 50 years. Humanity had spent 50 years trying to fit in with galactic civilization. They had shared technology, provided disaster relief, fought in 3 wars defending species that had just voted to cast them out. They had tried so hard to be good neighbors, to prove that they deserved a place among the stars, and it had all been for nothing. The Concord saw humanity as a threat. Not because of anything humans had done, but because of what they might do. They feared human creativity. They feared human adaptability. They feared the way humans looked at problems and found solutions that no one else had considered. They were right to be afraid, just not for the reasons they thought. Catherine finished her coffee and set the cup aside. "Send a message to Earth Command," she said. 3 words. The vote passed. On Earth, on Luna, on Mars, and the colony worlds, people would receive that message and know what it meant. The waiting was over. The pretending was over. For 50 years, humanity had hidden its true capabilities. They had shared only their most basic technologies. They had limited their expansion. They had pretended to be weaker, slower, less innovative than they really were. All because they wanted to be accepted. But acceptance was no longer possible. The Concord had made that clear very well, Catherine thought. If they want us gone, we will go. And when we return, they will learn what humanity truly is. She turned away from the view screen and headed for her quarters. There was planning to do. The future was not going to build itself. Behind her, stars of Concord space continued to shine. Unaware that everything was about to change, 6 months passed after the exile vote. In that time, humanity kept its word. Every ship returned home. Every station was abandoned. Every colonist packed their belongings and left Concord space forever. The withdrawal was orderly, efficient, and complete. The Concord celebrated. With the humans gone, trade flourished. Political tensions eased. The constant debates about rights and representation that human diplomats always started were finally over. For the first time in 50 years, the galaxy felt peaceful. The humans had retreated to a region of space that the Concord considered worthless. They called it the Outer Reaches, a turbulent zone of young stars and unstable systems. The radiation levels were dangerous. The planets were mostly barren rocks. The travel routes were treacherous and unpredictable. No sensible species would try to build a civilization there. The Concord was certain that the humans would struggle, suffer, and eventually come crawling back to beg for readmission. When that day came, they would impose harsh conditions. The humans would learn their place, but that day never came. On Nova Terra, humanity's largest colony in the Outer Reaches, Secretary General Maria Vasquez addressed the United Earth Parliament. The chamber was new, built in just 4 months using techniques that the Concord had never seen. It was filled with representatives from 12 billion humans scattered across 47 worlds. Maria was a stern woman in her 60s, with silver hair and a voice that could command silence without raising its volume. She had spent her entire career preparing for this moment, though she had hoped it would never arrive. "For 50 years we restrained ourselves," she said. "We shared only our most basic technologies with the Concord. We limited our expansion to avoid alarming our neighbors. We pretended to be weaker than we were, hoping that if we acted small enough, they would eventually accept us." She paused, letting her words sink in. "That strategy has failed. The Concord has made their position clear. They do not want us as partners. They do not want us as members. They want us gone. A rumble of anger passed through the chamber. These were people who had worked their entire lives to build bridges with alien civilizations, only to be told they were not welcome. Very well, Maria continued, her voice growing harder. We accept their terms, but we will no longer pretend. We will no longer hide what we are capable of. As of today, all restrictions on research, development, and expansion are lifted. Project Prometheus is authorized. Deep beneath the surface of Nova Terra in Labo, raideries that had operated in secret for 30 years, scientists began unlocking doors that had remained sealed since humanity first made contact with alien life. Dr. Samuel Wright stood before his team in the primary research complex. He was a thin man with wild gray hair and the kind of enthusiasm that made younger scientists nervous. He had spent his entire career working on technologies that were too advanced to share with the Concord, too powerful to reveal. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, we have work to do. For 3 decades, we have developed wonders that the galaxy has never seen. We have solved problems that other species do not even know exist. And we have kept it all hidden because we wanted to be good neighbors. He looked around at the faces of his team. Some were excited. Some were afraid. All of them understood the significance of this moment. That time is over. The universe is about to learn what humans can accomplish when we stop holding back. The first project they unlocked was faster-than-light travel without the need for jump gates. The Concord's entire transportation network depended on massive structures that took centuries to build. Humans had developed ships that could fold space around themselves and arrive anywhere instantly. The second project was energy collection on a stellar scale. The Concorde gathered power from planets and asteroids. Humans had designed structures that could wrap around entire stars and harvest every photon of light they produced. The third project was terraforming that worked in years instead of centuries. The Concorde spent generations making planets habitable. Humans had created nanomachines that could transform a dead rock into a garden. World in less than a decade, there were dozens more. Hundreds. Technologies that would have revolutionized galactic civilization. If the Concorde had been willing to accept them now, those technologies would build a new civilization. A human civilization, free from the restrictions of fitting in with species that would never accept them. 18 months after the exile, Concorde's intelligence agencies began noticing strange things. Human space had gone quiet. There were no distress signals, no refugee ships seeking asylum, no communications of any kind. Surveillance probes sent to the border simply vanished without explanation. Ambassador Zorvath, now serving on the Security Council, requested an emergency meeting. His metallic plates clicked nervously as he presented his findings. We have lost contact with 17 monitoring stations along the human border, he reported. Our analysis indicates that they were not destroyed. They were absorbed. The Kathrani delegate leaned forward, his mandibles clicking in confusion. Absorbed? What does that mean? We do not know. But the stations are gone. In their place, we are detecting structures that do not match any known engineering designs. They appear to be growing. Yes. Whatever the humans are building out there, it is expanding at a rate we cannot explain. The Council voted to send a diplomatic vessel to investigate. They chose a Deshan ship, hoping that the peaceful nature of that species would reassure the humans. The ship crossed into human space with full honors displayed, all weapons powered down. Its captain was a veteran commander named Thyril, who had negotiated with dozens of species over her long career. What she found changed everything she thought she knew about the universe, where scattered human colonies should have been struggling to survive. She found a civilization that had transformed beyond recognition. Planets that had been barren rocks just 18 months ago were now covered in forests and oceans. Stations the size of small moons orbited stars that should not have been stable enough to support habitation. And the ships. The human ships were unlike anything Thyro had ever seen. They moved without visible engines. They appeared and disappeared at will, blinking in and out of existence as if they were ghosts. A transmission came through on all frequencies. Concorde vessel. This is the Earth Defense Force, ship Steadfast. You have entered human space without authorization. State your intentions. Thorell's tactical officer was trembling. Captain, I am reading that ship at 9 kilometers in length. It is larger than our biggest battle station. Thorell forced herself to remain calm. We come in peace, she transmitted. We seek only to establish communication with the human government. Pause. Then, stand by for escort. Do not deviate from your assigned course. 2 smaller vessels materialized on either side of Thorell's ship. Smaller, but still enormous, compared to anything the Concorde possessed. They guided her deeper into human space, toward wonders that her reports would struggle to describe. The humans had not merely survived exile. They had flourished. And the Concorde was only beginning to understand what that meant. Captain Thorell had served the Concorde for 80 years. She had seen wonders across 1,000 worlds. She had witnessed the birth of stars and the death of civilizations. But nothing in her long life had prepared her for what she saw when the human escort brought her to their new capital. A structure surrounded the star itself, a sphere of metal and crystal and things she had no name for, capturing every photon of light that the star produced and converting it to energy. It was so large that her ship's sensors could not measure it properly. They kept returning errors, insisting that what she was seeing was impossible. Around this impossible structure orbited a civilization. Hundreds of thousands of habitats floated in perfect formation. Shipyards produced vessels at a rate that should have taken decades, not months. Research stations studied phenomena that Thorell's instruments could not even detect. Welcome to Solace, the human escort transmitted. Please proceed to Diplomatic Station 7. Representatives will meet you there. Thorell guided her ship toward the indicated station, passing wonders at every turn. She saw gardens floating in the void, somehow containing atmosphere without any visible barriers. She saw ships that seemed to be made of pure light. She saw humans walking on the surface of asteroids without any protective equipment. Their bodies somehow adapted to survive in vacuum. Her crew was silent. Some of them were weeping quietly. Others simply stared with expressions of total disbelief. The diplomatic station was a relatively small structure, only a few kilometers across. It had been designed to accommodate visitors from other species, with adjustable gravity and atmosphere in different sections. Thorell docked her ship and walked through the airlock with shaking legs. Ambassador. Daniel Harper was waiting for her. He was older now than when she had seen him on the news broadcasts. But his eyes were still sharp, and his smile was still calm. He wore simple clothes, not the formal uniforms of diplomacy. Somehow, that made him more intimidating rather than less. Captain Thorell, he said, extending his hand in the human gesture of greeting. Welcome to human space. I hope your journey was comfortable. Thorell accepted the handshake, her light form flickering with nervousness. Ambassador Harper, I did not expect to see you personally. I requested this meeting. I thought it would be appropriate given our history. He gestured for her to follow him. Please, come with me. I have something to show you. He led her through corridors that seemed to change shape as they walked, adapting to provide the most comfortable path for beings of different sizes. Eventually, they emerged into a garden. It was impossible. Gardens needed soil and water and atmosphere and sunlight. This garden had all of those things, somehow contained within a structure floating in space. Trees grew tall and green. Flowers bloomed in colors that Thorell had never seen. A stream flowed through the center, filled with small creatures that darted beneath the surface. Sit with me, Daniel said, lowering himself onto a bench beside the stream. We have much to discuss. Thorell sat, her light form still flickering with agitation. You have changed, she said. Your entire species has changed. We stopped pretending, Daniel replied simply. For 50 years, we held ourselves back. We shared only our simplest technologies. We limited our growth. We pretended to be weaker than we were. He picked up a small stone from the ground and turned it over in his fingers. We did this because we wanted to be accepted. We wanted to be part of galactic civilization. And when we rejected you, we stopped pretending. Daniel set the stone down carefully. The Concorde voted to exile us because they feared our potential. They were right to be afraid, but not for the reasons they imagined. Thyrol felt her light form pulse with confusion. I do not understand. We were never dangerous because we wanted to conquer or dominate. We were dangerous because we could solve problems. Every technology we shared disrupted your economies. Every innovation we offered challenged your hierarchies. Every idea we contributed upset your careful balances of power. He gestured at the garden around them. We could have built this decades ago. We held back because we wanted to be good neighbors. We wanted to fit in. But the Concord made it clear that fitting in was never possible. So you decided to become what we feared. No, Daniel's voice was gentle but firm. We decided to stop hiding what we already were. There is a difference. Thyrol looked around at the impossible garden, at the impossible star-encompassing structure visible through the transparent ceiling, at the impossible civilization that humanity had built in just 3 years. The galaxy is not doing well without you, she admitted. Since the exile, things have been falling apart. Daniel nodded. No. We have been watching. From here, we have sensors throughout Concord space. Not to spy, but to monitor. The Vrelian agricultural crisis. The Kathrani Civil War. The plague on the Shup Prime. Threll's light form went cold. How do you know about the plague? We only discovered it 2 cycles ago. It has not been announced publicly. We discovered it 6 cycles ago, Daniel said. We have already developed a cure. Then why have you not? Thyrol stopped, understanding suddenly. You were exiled. You are not permitted to intervene. The Concord made their choice. We respect that choice. Daniel stood and walked to the edge of the stream, looking down at the small creatures swimming there. But choices have consequences, Captain. The galaxy voted to face the future alone. Now they are discovering what that means. Thyrol felt something she had not felt in decades. It was hope mixed with shame, mixed with a growing understanding of how badly the Concord had miscalculated. What would it take? She asked quietly. For humanity to help us? Daniel turned to look at her, and his expression was not angry or bitter or triumphant. It was sad. We were willing to help before, he said. We asked for nothing except acceptance. Partnership. The chance to be part of something greater than ourselves. Your people rejected us. Called us dangerous. Cast us out. I know. I am sorry. I appreciate that, Captain. But sorry is not enough. Not anymore. He walked back to the bench and sat down beside her again. If the Concord wants our help, they will have to ask for it properly. Not through spies or secret messages. Through official channels, with full acknowledgement of what they did and why they did it. That would require the High Chancellor to admit he was wrong. The entire council would have to acknowledge their mistake. Yes, Daniel agreed. It would. Thyrol understood what he was saying. The Concord's pride would have to break before humanity would consider returning. Leaders who had built their careers on fearing humans would have to admit that fear had been foolish. It was a high price. But looking around at what humanity had accomplished, Thyrol suspected it was a price the Concord would eventually have to pay. I will carry your message, she said. I cannot promise they will listen. That is all I ask. Daniel stood and offered his hand again. Safe travels, Captain. I hope we meet again under better circumstances. Thyrol took his hand, and for a moment she felt something pass between them. Understanding, perhaps. Or forgiveness. She was not sure. She returned to her ship and set course for Concord space. Carrying news that would shake the foundations of galactic civilization, Captain, Thyrol's report spread through the Concord like fire through dry grass. Within days, every species knew what she had discovered. Within weeks, panic had begun to set in. The humans were not struggling. The humans were not dying. The humans had built something that made the entire Concord look like children playing with toys. High Chancellor Zorvath read the report 17 times. Each time, he hoped he had misunderstood something. Each time, the words remained the same. The humans had enclosed a star. They had transformed barren worlds into gardens. They had developed technologies that the Concord's best scientists could not even comprehend, and they had done all of this in less than 3 years. Zorvath's metallic plates clicked with anxiety as he walked the corridors of the Concord Capital Station. Everywhere he went, he saw signs of decay that he had not noticed before. Equipment that needed repair, sections that had been closed due to budget cuts, species that had once worked together now barely speaking to each other. The Concord was falling apart. It had been falling apart for years, but no one had wanted to admit it. The humans, with their constant ideas and innovations and solutions, had been holding things together in ways that no one had recognized. Now they were gone, and everything was breaking. The Vrelian agricultural crisis had killed 3 billion beings in the first year alone. The Vrelians were a species that lived on water worlds, and their entire food supply came from carefully cultivated ocean farms. A disease had spread through their crops, destroying everything it touched. The Concord had tried to help. Other species had sent food, but it was the wrong kind. Vrelians could not eat what other species ate. Scientists had worked on a cure for the crop disease, but progress was slow. Too slow. Billions died while committees debated solutions. The Kathrani Civil War was even worse. The Kathrani had always been a species divided into competing factions, held together by careful treaties and ancient agreements. But one of those agreements depended on trade routes that had passed through what was now human space. Without those routes, one faction gained an advantage over the others. War followed. It spread from system to system, drawing in neighboring species who had old grudges of their own. The Concord sent peacekeepers, but they were not enough. The peacekeepers were designed to handle small disputes, not full-scale civil wars. More forces were requested, but every species was dealing with its own problems. No one had resources to spare. The war continued to grow. And then there was the Plagon, Desha Prime. The Deshans were beings of pure light, contained in magnetic bottles that allowed them to interact with the physical world. They were ancient and wise and considered themselves above the concerns of younger species. They had voted for humanity's exile with particular enthusiasm. Believing that the chaotic humans disrupted the natural order of things, the plague attacked their magnetic containment. No one knew where it came from or how it spread. One day, the Shents began flickering. Their light grew dim. Their thoughts became confused, and then they simply went out, like candles blown by a wind. Within 6 months, a quarter of the Decian population was dead. Their scientists worked desperately on a cure. The best minds of the Concord joined the effort, but the plague was unlike anything they had ever seen. It seemed almost designed to attack Decian physiology, as if someone had created it specifically to kill them. No one could find a cure.
Hi. Chancellor Zorvath called an emergency session of the full assembly.
Half the seats were empty. Many delegates were too busy dealing with disasters at home to attend. Others had simply given up hope. "We made a mistake," Zorvath announced, his voice heavy with exhaustion and shame. 3 years ago, we voted to exile humanity because we feared what they might become. We believed that removing them from our civilization would make us safer, more stable, more unified. He looked around at the half-empty chamber. "You were wrong. The humans were never our enemy. They were difficult and confusing and sometimes annoying, but they were not dangerous in the way we imagined. They were dangerous because they made us better. They solved problems we did not know we had. They pushed us to improve in ways we did not want to improve." A Kathrani delegate spoke up, his mandibles clicking angrily. "What does it matter now? They are gone. They will never forgive us for what we did. But we must try. I propose that we send a delegation to human space. Not to spy. Not to demand. We go to apologize. We go to ask, humbly, for their help." The vote was unanimous, but only because so few delegates were present. Those who remained understood that pride was a luxury they could no longer afford. Zorvath led the delegation personally. He chose representatives from each of the species most affected by the current crises. Velians dying of starvation. Kathroni dying in war. The Shins dying of plague. The journey to human space took longer than expected. The old jump gates near the border had been removed. The delegation had to travel through normal space. watching as the stars of the Concorde faded behind them. When they finally crossed into human territory, they were met by an escort of vessels that dwarfed anything the Concorde possessed. The human ships did not threaten or intimidate. They simply guided the delegation toward the impossible structure around the star that the humans called. Ambassador Daniel Harper met them in the same garden where he had spoken with Captain Dyrell years before. He looked older, but his eyes were still sharp, and his manner was still calm. Zorvath wasted no time. "We come to apologize," he said, forcing his pride down with every word. "We were afraid, and our fear made us cruel. We treated you as enemies when you had done nothing wrong. We understand now that humanity was never a threat to us." Daniel listened in silence. His expression gave nothing away. "We need your help," Zorvath continued. "The Varelians are starving. The Kathrani are at war. The Thesians are dying of a plague that we cannot cure. Our civilization is falling apart. We do not have the ability to save ourselves." Still Daniel said nothing. "Please," Zorvath said, and the word came out broken, desperate. "Billions will die. We are begging you." Finally, Daniel spoke. 20 years ago, we asked you for acceptance, for partnership, for the chance to contribute to something greater than ourselves. You rejected us. You called us dangerous. You cast us out. I know. I am sorry. Now you come to us, not as partners, but as beggars. Not offering acceptance, but asking for salvation. Daniel's voice was not angry, but it was firm. The answer is no.
Ow.
Zorvath felt his plates crack with despair. "Please, we will do anything." "We will not save you," Daniel repeated. Then he paused, and his expression softened slightly. "But we will help you save yourselves." Zorvath looked up, not daring to hope. "What do you mean?" "Humanity learned something during our exile. Something important. We are not meant to be saviors. We are not meant to be masters. We are meant to be teachers." Daniel stood and walked toward the stream, watching the water flow. "We will share our knowledge with you. We will train your scientists. We will advise your engineers. We will help your leaders understand what they need to do. You will not do the work for us. No, because a galaxy that depends on humanity to solve its problems is just as broken as a galaxy that fears humanity for solving problems." Daniel turned back to face the delegation. "You need to learn to stand on your own. You need to become capable of facing your own challenges. We can show you how, but we cannot do it for you." Zorvath considered this for a long moment. It was not the answer he had hoped for. He had wanted humans to sweep in and fix everything the way they always had before. But perhaps that was the point. Perhaps that was why the Concorde had feared them in the first place. Not because humans were dangerous, but because the Concorde had become dependent on them without ever realizing it. "We accept," Zorvath said. "Whatever terms you offer, we accept." Daniel extended his hand in the human gesture of agreement. Zorvath reached out with his own metallic appendage and took it. For the first time in years, he felt something that might have been hope. The rebuilding took decades. It was not easy, and it was not fast. And many times it seemed like everything would collapse again, but it did not collapse. Human teachers traveled throughout the former Concorde, setting up schools and research centers and training facilities. They did not bring solutions. They brought knowledge. They brought methods. They brought ways of thinking that other species had never considered. The Vrelians learned new techniques for growing food. Not just the same crops they had always grown, but entirely new species of plants designed to resist disease and produce more nutrition. Human agricultural scientists taught them how to engineer these plants themselves, so they would never again depend on a single food source. Within 5 years, the famine was over. Within 10 years, the Vrelians were producing more food than they had ever produced before. They began exporting to other worlds, becoming one of the wealthiest species in the galaxy. The Kathrani civil war was harder to solve. You cannot teach peace the way you teach agriculture. But human mediators helped the warring factions understand something important. They were fighting over resources that no longer mattered. The old trade routes through human space were gone, but new routes could be built. New agreements could be made. It took 15 years of negotiations. There were setbacks and betrayals and moments when everything seemed lost. But eventually, the last weapons were laid down. The Kathrani signed treaties that would have been unthinkable a generation before. They formed a unified government for the first time in their history. The Thessian plague was cured within a year of the agreement. Human medical teams had developed the cure long before, but they had waited to share it until the Decians asked properly. Once the cure was distributed, human doctors taught Veshan scientists how to develop similar treatments on their own. The Veshans never forgot the months they spent dying while a cure existed just beyond their reach. But they also never forgot the humans who came to teach them after the agreement was signed. Those teachers stayed for years, training a new generation of Veshan medical researchers. By the end, the Shen medicine was among the most advanced in the galaxy. The old Concord was gone. In its place, something new was growing. 50 years after the exile vote, the Galactic Assembly met for the first time. It was not like the old Concord. There were no votes to exile species, no hierarchies based on age or power or perceived worth. Every species had an equal voice. Every species had equal responsibilities. The chamber was new, built on a station that orbited Solace. The impossible star-encompassing structure that humanity had built during their exile. 430 species were represented, including 18 that humanity had discovered in the outer reaches and invited to join. Ambassador Rebecca Torres rose to address the assembly. She was young, barely 40 years old, the granddaughter of a diplomat who had witnessed the original exile vote. She had grown up hearing stories of what had happened, how her grandmother's generation had walked away from rejection and built something beautiful. 50 years ago, this galaxy made a choice born of fear, she said. Her voice was clear and strong, carrying to every corner of the vast chamber. The species of the Concord looked at humanity and saw something dangerous. They saw a species that changed too quickly, that solved problems too easily, that challenged assumptions that had stood for millennia. She paused, looking out at the assembled representatives. Human and alien alike, they listened in silence. They were not entirely wrong. Humanity is dangerous in a way. We change things. We push boundaries. We ask questions that make people uncomfortable. We refuse to accept that anything is impossible. A ripple of acknowledgement passed through the assembly. Many of the representatives remembered the old days when human ideas had disrupted carefully balanced systems. But the Concord made a mistake. They thought the solution was to remove us from the galaxy. They thought that without humanity, things would be stable and peaceful and unchanging forever. Rebecca smiled, and it was the same smile her grandfather Daniel had worn when he walked away from the exile vote decades before. They learned otherwise. They learned that the universe does not stand still. Challenges come whether we are ready for them or not. Disasters strike without warning. And a civilization that cannot adapt, that cannot change, that cannot learn, will not survive. She gestured at the assembly around her. This is what we built instead. Not a concord where some species rule and others follow. Not an empire where one civilization imposes its will on everyone else. A true partnership where every species contributes what they can and receives what they need. The exploration initiative I am proposing today is the next step. A joint venture between all member species to push beyond known space. To seek out new life and new civilizations. To face the unknown together. The vote was unanimous. For the first time in galactic history, every species, without exception, chose unity after the assembly adjourned. Rebecca walked through the corridors of the station until she reached an observation deck that looked out on the stars. She stood there for a long time, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. Her grandmother's generation had been exiled. They had walked away from rejection and built wonders that the galaxy had never imagined. They had transformed humanity from a feared outsider into something else entirely. Her parents' generation had been teachers. They had traveled throughout the former Concord, sharing knowledge and building bridges. They had shown other species that humans could be partners instead of threats. Now it was her generation's turn. The exploration ships were being built in the shipyards of Solace, crewed by beings from dozens of different species. They would travel beyond the edges of known space, seeking new worlds and new peoples and new challenges. Rebecca did not know what they would find out there. No one did. The universe was vast and strange and full of mysteries that might take millennia to unravel. But that was exactly what made it exciting. A voice spoke beside her, and she turned to see High Chancellor Zorvath approaching. He was old now, his metallic plates showing the wear of decades, but he had insisted on attending the assembly in person. "Your grandfather would be proud," he said. "What you have built here is remarkable." "We built it together," Rebecca replied. "All of us, human and alien alike." Zorvath was quiet for a moment, looking out at the stars. "I think about the votes sometimes," he said. "The exile vote 50 years ago. I remember how certain I was that we were doing the right thing. How confident I was that humanity was a threat that needed to be removed. You were afraid. Everyone was afraid." "Yes, we were afraid." Zorvath turned to face her, his ancient eyes meeting hers. "I have learned something in the years since then. Fear is not always wrong. Sometimes the things we fear are truly dangerous. But fear is a terrible foundation for making decisions. It blinds us to possibilities. It makes us see enemies where there are only strangers." Rebecca nodded slowly. "What would you have done differently?" "Everything." Zorvath let out a sound that might have been a laugh, or might have been a sigh. "I would have listened instead of reacting. I would have asked questions instead of making assumptions. I would have looked at humanity and seen potential instead of threat. And now I am an old man who has lived long enough to see his greatest mistake transformed into something beautiful." He gestured at the assembly hall behind them. At the exploration ships being built in the distance, at the impossible structure of Solace gleaming against the stars. "I do not deserve to see this. None of us who voted for exile deserve to see this, but I am grateful that I have." Rebecca reached out and placed her hand on his metallic arm. "The past is past," she said. "What matters is what we do next." Zorvath placed his own appendage over her hand. "Then let us do something worth remembering." They stood together on the observation deck, human and alien, looking out at the stars that stretched endlessly before them. Somewhere out there, exploration ships were preparing to launch. Somewhere out there, new worlds were waiting to be discovered. Humanity had been exiled from the galaxy. They had returned not as conquerors or saviors, but as partners and teachers. They had helped rebuild a civilization that had once rejected them, not through force or coercion, but through patience and knowledge and the simple belief that everyone deserved a chance to grow. The future was bright, and for the first time in the history of intelligent life, it belonged to everyone. Rebecca Torres smiled as she watched the stars. Her grandfather had walked away from the exile vote with a grin on his face, knowing that humanity would endure. Now, 50 years later, she understood why. It was never about revenge or proving the galaxy wrong. It was about showing what was possible when fear gave way to hope, when isolation gave way to partnership, when rejection gave way to acceptance. The galaxy had voted to exile. Earth, humanity had grinned and walked away, and in the end, they had all walked back together.